Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Across the Fence. I'm Jolie Whitney. Last month, our Bird Notes program did not air due to a scheduling snafu. In just a minute, we're going to air that program about using nanotags to track wood thrushes. We're admitting this faux pas because it gives us an opportunity to thank some eagle-eyed viewers who pointed out our Bird Notes had flown the coop, if you'll pardon the pun. So a special thanks to Beth and Marjorie for keeping us honest. I began by asking Mark Labar what birds are being studied and who's doing the work.
This is a project that is done by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they had cooperators across the range of the wood thrush, which is the bird that we are focusing, or they're focusing this study on. And the wood thrushes have been declining for the past several decades, and so we know a lot about where they are and where they nest here in North America. And we know, a little bit less, but a lot still about where they winter. But one of the questions is, two big parts of their life cycle are migrating up to, Vermont or North America, and then migrating back to their wintering areas. And so in order to better understand what we're calling full life cycle conservation, we're using these small little tags in order to track them while they're migrating, both during their spring and their fall migration. And this is called a WOTH party, or that's what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. WOTH is the American Ornithologists Union's term for wood thrush, W-O and T-H, the first two letters of the first and last part of the name there. So, all across their range this year, from Missouri all the way to Vermont, all the way to the coast of Maine, further south in Massachusetts, these small tags were being put on wood thrush to kind of better understand their migration routes and paths.
And you've already hinted a little bit at where they're going, but tell me, what do you mean by this range? Where do they end up in the winter?
Well, throughout South America, Central America, when I go down to Belize, we catch a lot of wood thrushes there in Belize. And so, they'll use those parts of the tropics, so to speak. But again, the big question is, all right, each spring they leave, what paths do they use? And of course, they have to eat along the way. So these, the trails or the paths they use have to also be protected in order to protect the species as a whole.
All right, and what do they eat?
Bugs.
All right.
At least, at least here when they're breeding. They may shift over a little bit to fruit later in the season after they're done, but bugs are high protein. And when they've got their young, that's their primary food source.
All right, and it's getting towards the end of meteorological summer anyway. Are they still in our area?
They probably still are. They may be doing what's called post-breeding dispersal, where after they're breeding, they're starting to move around, but they may have not made any major southern shifts yet. That'll come in the coming months as they begin to head south down to their wintering areas.
All right, and I don't know if, I'm sure it picks up on camera, but these are pretty small little things. Can you put these on other animals as well?
Yes, so nanotags come in a bunch of different sizes, a bunch of different weights, which is very important. And people have been using them on bats, dragonflies. They can be small enough to get down to the dragonfly level. The biggest restraint is the size of the battery, because that battery has to stay active in order to transmit constantly while this device is on a bird's back or a bat's back.
All right, so let's get into the tagging process. Who's tracking these backpacks?
So again, this is done with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They're doing the project, but the nanotag work, a lot of it comes through a program called MODIS, the MODIS Wildlife Tracking System. And basically what it is a series of towers that are deployed all across North America, as well as the rest of the world. And you can see here all of these little yellow dots are towers that are set up in North America. So they're kind of like a cell tower, only instead of picking up signals from a cell phone, they're picking up signals from these little devices, which are unique, so we can follow and track each bird. This map here, if you would have gone 5 years ago, you would have seen half of those dots. So it's really kind of exploded as a way to answer these questions. And here in Vermont, we have a number of towers. We have towers that line the Champlain Valley, which one would imagine is a migratory pathway. And then across the northern tier of the state, we have what's called a curtain, which is a series of towers that are part of a larger curtain that extends from New York all the way to Maine.
And how do you catch one of these birds?
So, I'm a bird bander. I'm a federally licensed bird bander. I have the permits that are required for me to be able to do this work. So we use mist nets, these very fine nets that will go out. And in the case of this is much more targeted banding, we want to lure just the wood thrush into the nets. So we use things like these little decoys that look like wood thrush. We'll do what's called playback. So we'll play the song of the wood thrush, and the males think that they have another male on their territory, and so they'll come in to check things out, and while they do that, they'll get caught in the net, and then we'll proceed to band them and put the nanotag on.
So are you mostly catching males then?
Yes, yeah, primarily. There are other ways. If somebody finds a nest, you can target the females and the youngsters, but for us here in Vermont, we were just looking at catching males.
All right, and you said you're federally licensed, but are you doing it alone or are you working with some other
people?
So
I was fortunate to have a number of volunteers and a great intern, Devin, who helped me this summer from UVM. The two of us got really good. It takes two people to basically put these nanotags on. The first thing you do is we'll band the bird and then we'll weigh them. All of the birds had to be more than 45 grams because we want to make sure the weight of the nanotag isn't going to impede their ability to exist. So we will weigh them, we'll band them, take our usual measurements, wing measurements and stuff, and then we'll put the nanotag on.
And you already talked about this a little bit, but I think looking at one of these, it's hard to imagine an easy way to put this on a bird. So tell me what the process is.
Yeah, so this, it's a little bit of a butterfly, and those black, strings, or it's plastic, actually are the harness, and the harness slips down between the bird's legs. So you need two people and a crochet hook to kind of get it in place, and then you can snug it up to the right, so it fits perfectly. Then you crimp a little piece of metal, and the device is on.
All right, and you said that this doesn't impact their flying at all?
Nope. The antennas are short enough. The birds release just go about their business. We try here in Vermont to put the tags on near towers. So a lot of the tags this year went out. For instance, in the Champlain Valley. And this is a wood thrush here with a nanotag after it's been deployed and put on its back. We do use this device, so every time we get a tag or we get a bird and we would want to put a tag on, the first thing we have to do is we have to initiate the actual device.
Sure.
And once we put it in here, put the button, the pulse starts, and it goes about every 15 seconds. So as the birds are moving around or flying and they cross the paths of these towers, that signal is picked up and recorded.
All right, so you activate them and then they're good to go.
Then they're good to go, yeah. And again, as these birds move, and because there's so many towers now on the landscape, it really gives us a good idea of what pathways these birds are using. And again, migrating north and migrating south, there are stopover sites. There are locations that are really important. And here's an example of the final data. So this is a different species, a relative of the wood thrush. This is from a Swainson's thrush. And you can see there were devices, nanotags, that were placed on the Swainson's thrush in Colombia, down in South America. And these spaghetti lines that you see are the individual birds as they move up. And you can see most of them, instead of going up the coast of, maybe they go around Mexico, but they may also launch themselves from the Yucatan Peninsula and go straight across the Gulf of Mexico. And then they move on up to where they're breeding. And with these particular tags, they last about a year. So the hopes are, as we put them on this summer, here in Vermont, we put 6 on. but overall, across the entire study, there were more than 550 of these tags put on. So we'll be able to track them as they migrate south, and then they'll find a wintering area, spend a number of months down there, and then we'll be able to track them again as they come north. And again, the hope is that we get a better understanding of all portions of their life cycle, which helps conservationists hopefully improve conditions for them.
So how long have you been tagging? When do you usually start?
So we did most of this work in June, because that's when the males are most active, and we put all of our tags on, and we did have 8, so we have 2 left over. So now my next endeavor is hopefully to bring some leftover tags that people didn't deploy down to Belize, where I work at or volunteer at a place called Trees, and they have a MODIS tower there. So we'll make use of the nanotags starting down in Central America.
Yeah, maybe catch them on the other side of migration.
Right, exactly, hopefully, because the batteries are, like I said, the limiting factor, and even if they're not turned on, they lose some of their battery quality over time, so we want to use them as quickly as we can.
And you said that there are a number of others. This is kind of a federal initiation, somewhat.
Yeah.
Do you work with other states in the area?
So I work in Vermont, but this particular study, which again was done by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, was able to get partners in most of the states across the wood thrush range in order to deploy these tags. Some states had a lot more than than Vermont did. Audubon was fortunate that we had sufficient funds. Some have come through the Green Mountain Audubon Society to purchase these tags, and then I had time to put them on. Great.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you have a bird-related question, you can write Mark at the address on your screen. His email is listed there as well. Remember, pics or it didn't happen. And that takes care of Across the Fence for today. My thanks to the crew behind the scenes here at WCAX. I'm Jolie Whitney. Have a good one.